welcome to episode 3 of the WolfCast, the Malware Wolf podcast. Today is Saturday, June 26, 2021. My name is Alan, aka Corgi Sec, and I'm joined by my co-host Jason, aka Destruct Icon. I can't say that right.
I can't.
And yeah, well, I never had to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're the team at malwarewolf.com here to talk all things cybersecurity. So thank you for joining us. Wow, this is actually starting to feel like a thing now. We're doing 3. Technically, that's like a series.
Well, I mean, we're on the third Matrix trilogy. So, I mean, I guess it's going to be better than the second one then, but still be questionable.
Setting the bar high, I see.
This is the Dragon Ball Z episode, I guess.
It could be worse. All right, I guess we should probably actually, start talking about security-related things at some point. So, first thing today, I want to talk a little bit about the some of the changes to the format of the podcast. Basically, our second episode was significantly longer than the first one. And as we mentioned before, we're kind of still learning how to do this stuff. We're still new to the whole podcasting thing, figuring out what format works, what doesn't, etc. So basically, one thing we found out was that if we kind of did everything based on our initial structure, it tends to run a little bit long. So we're going to try to make some changes to try to basically make this format a little bit more digestible, basically. So some of the things we want to do to address that is we're going to try to keep the news section shorter. Idea is basically to just have a handful of topics and go through them fairly quickly. But some of the bigger changes that we want to make is essentially for episodes, we're going to have a guest interview, specifically with somebody new who we haven't interviewed before. That's going to basically be the main topic for that week. So that way we can kind of focus on talking to that particular guest. And then for the episodes where we don't actually have a main guest, we will go ahead and do things like cover a specific main topic. And by separating these out, we're hoping that the time is going to be a little bit more manageable, and we could kind of keep the length roughly where we want, which is going to be somewhere, between 45 minutes to about an hour and a half at most. So, yeah, this doesn't also mean that we're never going to have guests on any of the main topics. It just basically means if we do, it'll be repeat guests, and they will kind of just be a third host, essentially, for that particular episode. All right. So with that out of the way, we do also have a new YouTube series that we are starting. So I'll let you talk a little bit about that, Jason.
Yes, we are looking to create a new series for YouTube, which is mostly about tips and tricks. After a few minutes of back and forth chatting about it, Alan created this amazing idea of a title called Bite-Sized. And immediately just everything started coming together. So we wanted to build out a channel that is focused on tips and tricks, and it's smaller chunks of data. You go on YouTube, you start looking for tutorials, and you look at how long some of these take. Some of them are full 20 to 30 minute tutorials telling you, hey, make sure you click on these specific spots, and you're just sitting there waiting for pages to load up. Or maybe it's strictly just audio, so you don't have a solid understanding of exactly what's going on, or some of the audio is potentially difficult to actually follow. The other piece of it is some of these tools have problems. Most people don't realize that they'll just follow the actual YouTube video, and suddenly they have like 5 or 6 different errors, and the person who recorded it went through those errors, whether they're dependency errors or whether there's very specific problems. As an example, I have a few with the tool that we're going to do first, which is the PS image, where you can hide PowerShell scripts within pictures, and there's a few gotchas in there, and we want to highlight some of those just for people to be able to see, and a means for people be able to kind of utilize as maybe frequently asked questions almost when messing around with these. But we're going for a range of stuff, whether it's red team, blue team, general digital forensics, potentially analysis tips, and again, just general tricks of how to get through things or how to make things faster, or some scripting ideas that might make life easier.
Yeah, but basically, yeah, the kind of core of this is to keep it digestible, to keep it very easy to consume, to have it separated. So if, for example, you're somebody who maybe you're aware of the tool, you just don't know how to use it, or you need an example, so you can do exactly that without having to scrub through a video and look for that specific section and hope they covered it. Or if you're saying like, hey, I did this or trying to do this, but I had some problems. Well, let's see if they did as well. So the idea is to kind of let people consume it the way they want, but make it very, very easy. Something doesn't take a lot of time. So hopefully that tends to help some people out, and we'll take ideas as well for what kind of things we want to do. But the range of topics will be fairly broad as well. So we'll have all sorts of stuff in there, and we'll try to keep it organized as well, by separating it out between things like tooling, analysis, labs, stuff like that. So idea is we will try to keep it clean, keep it organized. So if create like separate series and stuff like that, so you don't get lost in a billion small little videos. But we're pretty excited about it, so hope you guys are as well.
Yeah, we are going to target for probably next week for our first one. And again, the overall goal is that these videos are only going to be 5 to 10 minutes. There's probably going to be ones that go potentially a little bit longer, but the structure is always going to be about more of an introduction, telling you about the tool that we're using, why it might be good to use it. Then it goes into the overall kind of the overall how-to. How do you get this thing working? How do you actually utilize it? And then the end will actually have most of the FAQ and troubleshooting pieces that we ran into. That way, if you just want to see how it's working, how does it actually get off the ground, you'll have it at the start there, and then at the end, you can just kind of scroll through really quick of like, oh, did this person have any of these types of problems?
Yeah. So should be good, and as we said, we have plenty of topics to cover already at this point. But as we go on, as we build out the audience and the community, we're obviously going to be taking feedback just like we do with anything related to podcasts. So cool. So with that covered, I guess we can go and move into the news section for the week. So I just have actually there was some pretty interesting things this week. So a couple of these we're going to spend a few minutes on. But a couple of them are fairly, self-explanatory as well. So let's get into it. The first story from Dark Reading is 74% of Q1 malware was undetected via signature-based tools. So, this is fairly self-explanatory. I just wanted to include it because I do think that's a fairly significant number, especially kind of considering how many companies still use antivirus, for example, as one of their main ways of doing, incident response, in the sense that the SOC is basically just told, oh, okay, well, we got an alert. Well, go run an AV scan. Is there anything? Yes or no? And that's essentially determines whether they close that ticket or not. So, yeah.
I would be quite interested to see like all the different statistics around that, like just what is technically associated to all those signature based rules. Are they mostly focused on atomic indicators, and just general information like that, or because I mean, signature based can be such a broad term, right? Like I've seen signatures that are specifically focused on how network folders are traversed, and like is that really focused on signature, or is that more of a behavioral? What exactly does that represent?
Yeah, I think this is more thinking like in the more traditional terms of signature based, the way the kind of AV signatures tend to work. So I would say something like more like a hard indicator, like hashes and stuff like that, or maybe specific file names and stuff like that.
Yeah,
because it does mention things like fileless malware and living off the land being one of the reasons that this is the case, which makes me think like it's. But yeah, I mean, again, it's just interesting because, like I said, there's still, I see it a lot, at least in the past 2 or 3 SOCs I've interacted with. Like their process has been, okay, well let's we got an alert, run an AV scan, there's nothing, okay, close it.
Sure.
Which this would indicate that's generally not a good way to do that. I mean, I don't think that was ever really a good way to do that, but somebody clearly does because people seem to keep doing it. So.
Yeah. Well, I got to start somewhere. Although, like the AV is and so many different, like even EDRs at this point are kind of bending what that name actually means to be an AV. Because there's like people replacing their AVs with things like CrowdStrike as an example, and
sure,
they're fantastic. Like all the stuff that I've personally tossed at CrowdStrike has mostly been found and gets picked up, but I don't know enough really about the way that thing does signatures to be able to determine if this falls in line with this.
Yeah, I think maybe this is specifically looking at like your traditional AVs, but yeah, even those lines are getting blurred because a lot of AVs are trying to turn themselves into EDR tools for better or worse.
Yeah. All
right. Moving on from that, this is pretty interesting from another story from InfoSecurity magazine. A newly discovered Dell bug impact 30 million PCs. So this didn't seem super great. Basically, it seems like there's a vulnerability, several vulnerabilities that allow execution of arbitrary code within the machine BIOS for certain Dell machines. And this is affecting specifically the BIOS Connect feature of the Support Assist function on Dell. I just kind of wanted to bring this up because of, Dell is a pretty big manufacturer. So a lot of people have Dell machines, and given that this is a vulnerability that potentially ends up giving you access to the machine BIOS basically remotely, doesn't sound great. There is some bug chaining that has to happen to exploit this, but if you have a Dell machine, something to potentially look into.
Sounds like a fun situation to also utilize ransomware with. That's for sure.
I'm sure somebody is already doing it.
Yeah.
Like the second this went public, somebody is out there incorporating that. Like it doesn't take long. All right, moving on from that.
He said ransomware, Pee-wee. Okay.
A story from SecurityWeek.com about a member of Fin7 cybercrime gang sentenced to prison in the U.S. So I'm sure at this point anybody who keeps up with any security news is familiar with Fin7. They're one of the biggest financially motivated I guess you could even call them technically APT groups. They're fairly sophisticated compared to some other commodity malware operators, etc. Well, the good news is one of them was finally sentenced to about 7 years in prison. This person's name is Andrei Kolpakov. He was arrested in Spain in 2018 and then extradited to the U.S. in 2019. So, always good news to see some of these guys actually get caught, because that group is still fairly active. So,
I just want to say, Alan, that I really appreciate you specifically mentioning that, like, most people should know about this. And I was asking you what the hell Fin7 is right before we started.
Well, you're not most people.
Thanks. I feel special in multiple ways. So,
well, you're too busy to keep up with such basic things like that.
Whatever, Alan.
Next, something a little bit different. This is a story from ZDNet, a deep dive into the operation of the Lockbit ransomware group. And I like to include things like this because this is actually a really good, kind of fairly in-depth analysis of this particular ransomware group. There's essentially, if you go to this article, there is about a 30-page white paper that is really goes into the details on this particular ransomware and their operations. So not much to say about that, except just, I tend to like reading things like this. It gives you a good idea of a very specific family of malware or a group, and I always tend to learn something, so hopefully you guys are interested as well.
Cool.
All right, and possibly, at least to me, the most interesting story this week comes from CBSNews.com, who are, very well known for their security reporting. 80% of ransomware victims suffer repeat attacks, according to a new report. The title is fairly self-explanatory. Unfortunately, there isn't a massive amount of detail inside the article as far as are those different groups, same groups, etc. But I suppose it's not that surprising.
Yeah.
At least to me, if you got hit and you're somebody who, especially if you're somebody who paid, now you kind of have a reputation for paying, and you probably have a reputation for not great security because you've already been victimized once. And fixing that and righting that ship kind of tends to take time.
And some of the stuff we talked about before, just the fact is there's a lot of these where the customer service, if you will, of the ransomware actors tend to be not necessarily thorough, but they give some kind of idea as to how they got in, but they won't tell you exactly. It'll be something like, oh, you should probably not make it so that your systems that have RDP available open to the public. Well, that's usually a good sign that you shouldn't have your RDP systems open to the public. But this is a pretty common theme for some of this. But what most people don't realize is that they also take the information of what you've done, not necessarily your customer data, but the fact that they have hit you successfly, and they'll go on the dark web and say, hey, by the way, we know of X company or Y companies or Z amount of companies that have these open RDP access. We will sell you that list, whether it be by IPs or maybe they'll up that cost based off of actual credentials utilized. And they won't necessarily be the ones to hit somebody again, but they will sell off the information so that you will personally get hit again. So it's something to remember when talking about that, if you pay or not. Now there's always going to be a catch, right? You don't want your company to go out of business and then all of a sudden all your all the people under you, all the families and everything. They no longer have a means to feed their kids or feed themselves. But there has to be real understanding as to that type of stuff happening. So if you have a security team and you aren't doing things such as monitoring dark web or monitoring any of the IRC channels that are still being utilized or any of these other means of communication, it might be something to start looking into. There's actually vendors out there that also have appliances that do the same.
Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, this next story, I'm sure everybody has already heard. So John McAfee, the creator of McAfee antivirus software, has died. It's another story from Dark Reading. McAfee, who he was being held in a Spanish jail on U.S. tax evasion charges, and he had learned apparently on Monday that he would be extradited to the U.S. Right now, the suspected cause of death is suicide. So that's honestly like not a ton to say about the person. I feel like anybody following John McAfee in any capacity has seen something. Either, you know, there's no shortage of stories of things he has done. So, just wanted to mention it because, you know, he is somebody who, you know, whether you like him or not, he did have he was a significant name in the industry and a relevant one at some point. I think really the more kind of the interesting part here is some of the stuff we talked about before is any potential things that might now leak as a result, because he was a notoriously paranoid person. So what does that mean? You know, whether there was some potential for things like a dead man switch. So all of a sudden, now there's going to be some data that potentially gets released that might have some interesting implications. Not sure if necessarily for the industry, but definitely for, you know, some of the dealings and the people that he was involved with, and there's a lot of those if you know anything about his background.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I personally don't, but the one thing that I do know is one of the folks that we used to work with was walking down the street in Vegas and bumped into him during one of the DEF CONs probably like 7 years ago or something like that. He was like, "Wait, you're John McAfee," and he took a picture with him. So he was like, "Hey, look, it's John McAfee." I went, "That's great. I'm glad you're okay."
That's pretty. I'm a little bit surprised I would actually see John McAfee at DEF CON.
Yeah,
I kind of thought he was kind of past all that, but maybe not. Maybe
it was a while ago. So.
Well, you got to do something in between all those millions of dollars he was spending.
Sure.
All right, so that wraps up our news section. So I think this is a good time for us to take a short break, and we'll be right back. And we're back. So now we should get into our main topic for this week, and we're actually going to continue with part 2 of our recruitment series, and this week we're going to be focusing on getting started and skills building, both kind of very important topics to a lot of people, so we do have a decent amount of things to say here, so I'll let you get started.
Yeah, we are looking into figuring out ways to help folks provide ideas of how to get started and how to build out your skills within the industry, within the field. Everybody has their own ideas, and I 100% don't believe there is any possible way to consolidate all of that and make it so that one person can rule them all and know them all. So the best thing that we can do is provide some more of that data let people know a little bit about what we did, what we've done as far as helping others, helping ourselves to move forward, and what we've found to be successful. So I think that's kind of where we are going to move towards.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, all we can really talk about is our own personal experience, and obviously that's going to differ from somebody else's, but...
Oh, I don't know about that. I can make stuff up. Like, oh man, there was this one time I was fighting this giant octopus, and then I got into security. Like that. Yeah, I don't know.
That must have been a very smart octopus then. Was he like, why are we fighting? We should work in security.
Spiders are the fiercest animals in the animal kingdom. Was that from Kevin Smith? I think that was a Kevin Smith joke.
Yes, it was. but yeah, the idea is to just kind of speak to the things that we know and what worked for us. And I mean, we're at least to some degree are still working in a capacity of having something to do with hiring new people. At least for me, I know I'm currently in the process of interviewing for SOC analysts and stuff for my company as well. So I'll kind of inform my side of things based on what I've been telling those folks and what I've been expecting in essentially those hiring engagements. So
cool. Yeah, our first piece here is networking. This is very broad. We'll talk about a little bit, but some of the things that we pointed out here is just reading news. I mean, I think there's been 3 different times now over the past 3 episodes where I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I don't read. And I guess it's a little hypocritical for me to say, make sure you guys are reading news all the time. However, I follow a lot of people. And I get a lot of my information just by following and seeing those quick little blurbs of blah happened. And I wish I could say it's out of sheer laziness or anything like that, but I really don't know. Maybe it's my ADD that makes it so it's very difficult for me to focus on looking at an article for longer than like 15 to 20 seconds. I'm sure there's a lot of people right now with that problem, especially all the folks coming out and mentioning their personal issues. But I do know when I start seeing articles start flying across across my little Twitter page of people mentioning things, I get to about 2 paragraphs before the snooze button gets hit in my head and I move on to the next thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, people have a lot to go through, so I kind of, I kind of understand that not everybody's way of absorbing information is sitting there and reading it. But that's kind of why we also say things like follow people. It's not necessarily about, hey, just go to, some of those websites we just mentioned in the news. Like, that's a valid thing to do, obviously, if you like consuming news in that way. But if you don't, following people, this is why we included that. Like, I think pretty much like the entire reason I started my Twitter account is not because I actually ever tweet anything. It's just so I can follow other people who say things that I might need to be aware of. Like, I don't really tweet, but like I follow like 300 people, and most of them are in the security industry, because that way, and a lot of times, somebody will tweet something out way before there's ever an article about it, because it is much easier to do that and much faster. So like,
and people love talking.
Yep. And to be fair, there's a lot of smart people in our industry who say a lot of smart things that you probably want to know, and even if it's not news necessarily, but even just things like, hey, they might just have some cool analysis to share, or like their experience, even, there's people who share experiences as hiring managers, as, their experience with stuff like vendors, etc. Like, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of people covering a wide range of skill sets, and it costs you nothing to just start following people on Twitter, and Twitter even helps you out and gives you a recommendation for people who have kind of those similar interests.
Yeah, it's never going to suggest me for anybody, because the only thing I think I have pinned on my Twitter is an ode to Ralph Wiggum, and it shows him peeing his pants. So I guess that's just my personality.
Hey, there's always a good time for a Ralph Wiggum gif.
Yeah,
it has its place. But yeah, I mean, don't underestimate the importance of this stuff. Like, I'm gonna get into this more later when we get into the interviewing part of our recruitment series. But like, this is one question I tend to ask people, especially new analysts and everything. Is like, well, what do you do to keep up with the industry? Like, who do you follow? And you need to be able to give me at least a couple of specific examples, because I think it's very easy to say, oh, I have an interest and I'm passionate and I do this and I do that. But then, when you try to dig any deeper than that, it turns out to be very surface level. And again, this is really easy to do. I understand maybe, you might not have the time to build your own server room and a lab that, some massive lab that costs thousands of dollars and all of this stuff, but it costs you nothing to just follow somebody and say like, hey, I saw, John Strand tweeted out something cool about a new tool, or new training that he's doing. Like, that's enough. Or just being able to say like, hey, this is the significant event that happened in the past X amount of weeks. So yeah, it's the barrier to entry to this stuff is very low, and there's so many resources out there. Like, there really is no excuse to kind of not be doing it.
Yeah, and it also, just as you were saying, it helps you speak to the industry, right? And if you're in a situation where you don't have any locals, like any local meetups or anything like that, or if you're just a plain introvert like the most of us, this is where we live. This is our natural habitat. I mean, if this was a zoo, it would basically just a box that people couldn't actually see into, and we'd just be sitting there on our computer, and they'd just throw food in every now and then, maybe some Hot Pockets. But the fact of the matter is that this is a means to engage with folks through PMs, DMs, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, just your messages to people, and start having those conversations, start building that rapport, to where you will be able to, I mean, again, networking in of itself will get you further, or it certainly feels like it'll get you further into being able to get a job within security than like spending all your time focused on trying to learn. And I say that simply because the people who are constantly networking, they tend to learn through osmosis, just gaining it just from being a proxy of somebody else's interests. And that is, they of course won't be in situations where they will be the strongest, but they will be a means to be able to work with other people. That's another piece. You spend all your time focusing on yourself, focusing on your own studies. It's really hard to transition into being part of an entire team and understanding what it means to rely on other people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also something we're going to get into as well eventually. It's just that aspect of, the right mindset to have and being a part of that team and stuff like that. But yeah, at the end of the day, obviously we're not trying to say like, the studying on your own is not important, but that's a piece of it as well. And it's there's a reason the saying is, it's about who you know. Like that's no matter what the industry is, generally you're going to be, your chances of getting a job, or moving, further into maybe even the company you're with tends to be better the more people especially people in more influential positions. And, our industry is really not any different.
Yeah. So as you're talking to people, find out what they care about. I think that's, I don't know if that's something we've directly hit on over the past few episodes, but it's more about you finding a way to explore and branch out to find out what may be of interest to you. So as you're talking with people and as you're following these folks and trying to gain an understanding of why they're interested in something, you'll find out that you just might have that same interest, and within that, you might just find a mentor. You might find somebody who says like, "Hey, it seems like you're pinging me a lot about blah. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out ways if we can chat about helping you help with a project, getting you in some kind of internship." I mean, again, a lot of this stuff isn't targeted to people who are already in the field, in the industry, or seniors. This is really targeted to the early in their career or just getting into their career type of folks, maybe a couple years. And this is what we've found, at least to be pretty successful, is once you start being interested in others, you will find that the positivity reciprocates and starts being good for you.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I've seen direct examples of people on Twitter who did exactly that. Like they engage with some of these folks who have been in the industry a while consistently, and they show interest, and eventually, if you show enough interest and drive, if they are in the position to help you out, they very likely will. And you also tend to learn about, like, you know, what kind of personalities do you work with best. Like, obviously, you know, different people are gonna interact with you in a different way, and maybe sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But like, even the process of finding that stuff out is very valuable, because like we said earlier, when it comes to working in teams later, it helps you learn how to deal with different personalities in a professional environment, and that's very, very important, because the thing is, no matter how good you are, no matter how technical you are, you're never going to be working in isolation. Like, that's not what our job is. You're never the incident response team. You're never the SOC person. Like, you're always a part of a bigger team. And even if by some miracle you are the only incident response person, by the nature of being in IR and the IR process, you're having to interact with other teams. There's no way around that. So you cannot live in isolation, which means you have to know how to work with other people with different backgrounds, with different personalities, with different skill sets, and getting used to that early and kind of getting practice in basically doing that early is extremely important. Because at the end of the day, you know, to me, I'd rather work with somebody who has a decent personality and is willing to learn and willing to help than somebody who's a technical genius, but I hate, you know, having to interact with them.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a solid like year of my life trying to communicate to everybody with Simpsons memes, and I started sending them to people who have no idea what Simpsons is, and it was incredible. Just, they're like, "Okay, what are you trying to get from me?" And I'm like, "Man, you don't know Simpsons, and now you're alienating someone, and then you feel bad." I don't know, whatever.
Well, yeah, then you start them sending, you know, South Park memes.
Got it.
Okay. See? They might like one thing and not the other.
That's true.
Yeah, and the last little bit here, and we're definitely going to cover this more later, is when it comes to learning, when it comes to especially, you know, figuring out how to learn and how to learn properly, focus on the how and the why and not the tools. There's a billion tools out there, and they're constantly changing, and, you know, they're being deprecated, new things are coming up. Like, don't make your knowledge dependent on a tool, because that is going to be something that it sets a very bad habit, and it makes you very, very dependent on something that isn't really a constant. It's something that's going to potentially go away. So don't put yourself in that situation. Focus on the how and the why. Focus on understanding, okay, if I'm using a tool, what does this tool actually do? How does it work? Why do I need it versus doing it manually?
We'll get into it here in just a few minutes, but an example of that would be in one of the things we always tell folks is experiment in CTFs and learn in CTFs. Well, if you're a person that is really, really good at Googling and really good at research, you're actually doing a disservice to yourself by finding things. So we talked about CyberChef. I think we've talked about CyberChef at some point. But CyberChef is a fantastic tool. It will do just about anything you want. However, if you start dumping base64 encoded data in there and you get to an answer in CTFs, and all of a sudden people start asking you in interviews, well, what is base64? How do you identify it? What does it mean? And you're not able to speak to it. That's where that disservice comes from, is you as a mentor just told someone to go do CTFs. That person got through it because they used the magic encoding identification through CyberChef, and their response is going to be like, well, I don't know, CyberChef just told me what this is. So you are directly causing a disservice to their career, this person's attempt to move from something to another, despite the fact that they had a positive outcome. So it's highly confusing, extremely confusing from their perspective to be like, yes, I got to an answer, and then someone going, I don't care, like the way you got to it was wrong and you don't understand blah 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 blah. So it's sad.
Exactly. And more to the point, like it just sets, like I said, it sets a bad habit. Like you don't want to think about analysis in that way, because it's not about just focusing on that end result. Like that's not the important part. It's knowing how to get there, knowing why you got there. And I'll give you a very quick example. Like one of the ways we learn how to do essentially live response in our first real SOC job is basically our mentor put us in a room and said, okay, we're going to do live response. You're going to do it all manually. Here's the artifacts we want you to collect. Go ahead and do all that. And then after you're done with that, I'll give you a script that'll do this for you. So we spent about 8 hours, if I remember correctly, trying to just collect everything, because it's a fairly long list. And then at the end of that, we basically plugged in a USB drive with a script on it that did it in about 30 seconds.
And that's gonna be the way, if we can take something from The Mandalorian. But the like things like Kanza, and just Velociraptor, all these different tools and applications, appliances, they're going to start doing a lot of that collection for us, and we don't have to do anything anymore, and it's wonderful and fantastic. And Eric Zimmerman is a great guy, but the fact of the matter is that we still have to know and understand why this happens. If we don't, then we are pretty doomed to regress here within the next 10 years, 15 years. Because when these people start not necessarily aging out, but wanting to retire, who's going to help lead? Who's going to help push people forward? It's just those thoughts that come into our head.
Yeah, but in addition to even just that, like, how do you know you can trust a tool if you don't know what it does and how it works?
Right.
Like,
sure.
To me, that's kind of the biggest thing there, is the reason that exercise was so powerful is because after we did that, when I ran that script, I knew what it was doing because I had to do it manually. So it's like I can then take that data and compare it to the stuff I collected manually before and go, did these things match? And if by some chance they didn't match, I can now start questioning the tool and say, okay, maybe that's a bug. Maybe it didn't do that particular collection correctly. But if you don't have an understanding of what the tool is doing and how it works, then you basically are inherently trusting it and assuming that the thing it's providing you with is 100% accurate. And you cannot do that as an analyst. Like, that is not the right mindset to have, because a tool is something maybe that should make things easier, but you need to know how it works, and you should always basically go with the trust but verify approach.
Yeah, and you never know. You may not necessarily be part of it. However, there could be situations you fall into where someone above you will have to come in as an expert witness, and they're going to have to talk to that information. And if they have to talk to that information and someone comes back and says, yeah, but what about X, Y, or Z bug that is like a well-known problem with this parser, and it gets these timestamps wrong pretty frequently. Did you account for that? And if you don't know that information and you are dealing with something like an insider threat, or not even just an insider threat, but maybe there's some kind of ethics problem with a user or employee, that could cause a lot of issues, and it can look very poorly on your team.
Yep, and just kind of, I guess, the last thing on that, and we could literally do an entire podcast just on this topic alone.
Sure.
But the one thing I will do, and to kind of get a sense for this, is when I'm interviewing analysts, like I will ask them, okay, walk me through analysis of X, and as they're doing that, like 99% of the time, their answer is going to be, well, I go to VirusTotal and I do this, and it tells me if it's bad or not. Okay. Or they'll do that and say, like, I use this tool. And then my next question is going to be, okay, you don't have that tool anymore, or that tool didn't give you any useful output. What do you do then? And out of 9 out of 10 people that I followed, like, have that follow-up question with, is just utter silence. Yeah. Is because the environment they're in has been so focused on, no, you do this in this tool in this way, you take that output, and that's what you do. Absolutely zero focus on understanding why you're using that tool over something else, and what does it actually do, how reliable it is, and don't put yourself in that situation. And on the flip side, if you actually learn the hows and the whys, you're going to automatically put yourself above a lot of people out there who are unfortunately in these environments that are not teaching them the right way to think.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So the next part of this, just some of the things essentially that you can be learning about, and some learning resources in tandem with all the other stuff we already mentioned. So why don't you go through some of that?
Sure. Yeah. This is a lot of these things are websites that I've suggested to many people. I mean, in fact, one of these one of our colleagues. Yeah, sure. One of the folks we worked with for quite some time. He's done quite a bit with one of these websites, and by all means, it's every person that I know that has gone through his training has been fantastic. So I'm going to start from the top here. One of the problems I ran into, I was talking to someone trying to get in. Fella just passed his A+, so he's super excited because he was running in some difficulties with that. And once he passed it, I was like, you know what, let's figure out ways to get it so you can get some good foundational knowledge on the Security Plus. This is a pretty solid natural step. And the thing I started finding out is, golly, the cost for Security Plus training in so many different places is outrageous now. I mean, just going through CompTIA directly for the things like the retake and the book and the labs, it was somewhere around $1,000, I think it was, like $900. And like that's, I totally understand that these folks are there to make money. They have all this content already built out, but it's hard, and everybody who's listening should probably agree also that it's difficult to tell someone to shell out that kind of money when they have a rocky or uncertain circumstance on their side, where, hey, that is potentially a month's worth of rent that I'm throwing out the door. So some of the things that were suggested by the folks in one of our other channels, one of our other Slack channels, is udemy.com. Their Security Plus training, which is focused on 601, it's $100, so it's not too shabby. I've seen quite a few reviews on them that say that it's pretty positive. They use that to actually pass the course, and it felt pretty good. There was not a whole lot of negativity around some of that stuff. The things I really don't like personally are the ones where they just dump in there like, oh, hey, I went through this course in X amount of hours, like 4 hours, 5 hours, or I burned through this within the week and I passed my Security Plus. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for something where you can take your time and really understand the concepts, get a little bit of lab experience, or at least have some solid presentations that you can have a core understanding. And there was a lot of positivity in there about Udemy, as well as for what the price is.
Yeah, I mean, the idea with any of this stuff should be like, you should be looking to learn. Don't do this stuff just to pass an exam, because at the end of the day, like, that's a thing on your resume, but like, the idea is to take away the knowledge that is much more valuable.
Yeah, and going on to some of these other things, this is $100 for the actual Security Plus training. But there's a lot of these websites that just charge you a monthly. Some of them you actually have to pay all up front, like it's an actual annual cost. But they will bill it as the monthly, and the monthly tends to be around that $20 range. So the first one here is Pluralsight. Pluralsight is just fantastic. I can't even count how many people at this point that I keep pushing over to that, simply because Ryan Chapman, who's the person we used to work with, has done a whole lot of good stuff on there. And he did the incident response course, and we love Ryan. So it's just a situation where if there's one person that I would say to make sure that you're kind of following and making sure that you have a conversation with at some point in your life, it's certainly going to be Ryan. But from the standpoint of what that training is, it goes through a lot of that foundational understanding.
Yep, and yeah, definitely. Like, just to say a little bit more about that, it's like Ryan's course is pretty damn popular on there as well, because I think if you go into the incident response section, his course is the first one that pops up. I've checked this, I think, as recently as last week. So Ryan has basically just been teaching like forever. Like, he's really, really good at the teaching side of things. So like his training really reflects that. So he has a lot of other things, I think, as well on there that he's doing. But definitely that incident response training, check it out. He does pretty fantastic stuff. And I mean, even for people who have kind of been doing this for a while, like going back and looking through some of that stuff as a refresher is not going to do you any harm.
Yeah. Once you're done with that, well, before jumping into the next piece, the one thing I will say is that because you have this monthly cost, it allows you room to explore. And that's one of the reasons I love these specific types of websites, is because I get those wild hairs every now and then of like, I want to jump into machine learning, and people are like, machine learning is terrible, go away. But I have a genuine interest in like what can we do with data sets, and we're starting to see a trend where that's being built into many different types of the applications and appliances that are out there. But it hasn't been totally used. It hasn't been used to its maximum potential, I guess is the best way to put it. And in many cases, it's being sold as this thing that will ultimately do everything for you. And I actually believe that. I believe it can, but that's like years of data that you need to drop into these different data sets. But not to jump into talking about AI and machine learning, but things like Pluralsight and these different websites, they give you a means to be able to explore this stuff. And I love that. I love that overall idea, and just the means to be able to just say, hey, I want to focus on something outside the realm of blah, and I don't have to pay extra subscriptions for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the thing. It's like anything you might have a potential interest in, it costs you nothing to kind of diversify, I guess, your base of knowledge. And in a lot of cases, actually, because Pluralsight is not even that expensive, your company might actually even be paying for it because it's, or if they're not, maybe it's something that you could potentially request because, let's face it, if everybody could pick sans training, we would all get sans training, but getting that actually approved is a much bigger argument, where something like Pluralsight is, it's nothing in comparison, so that's maybe a lot easier to convince your boss to maybe buy if you don't already even have it. But
I'd be super interested as well if you're like a nonprofit agency or if anything like that, if they have discounts for folks within those realms. Because I used to work at the YMCA, and while working at the YMCA, I was able to get signed up with a lot of different places, including even like Microsoft, who does a lot of really good things for folks in nonprofit agencies. So if you've done anything or know anybody in nonprofits that are just desperate for knowledge and they want different kinds of training, tell them to go check out some of these places just to find out, do they have any kind of special options for those types of folks.
The next one here is Code Academy, and that's one that I've used myself as well. And this is for those folks who maybe want to get started with programming. And the reason I tend to like it personally is because you're actually coding. Like, they actually give you an environment. You are writing code, and they have a number of different languages. Obviously, like JavaScript courses, Python courses, all sorts of things, SQL, and essentially it's actually free if you just wanted it at the basic level, so it doesn't even cost you anything, but it's $20 if you want to go for the pro license. But it's for people who are basically just looking to get started with programming. It's a pretty good place to start, and because it's interactive, I tend to prefer it over just, one problem I have personally with where I struggle when it comes to coding is learning that from books. I find very, very difficult, because to me coding is something you have to have. Like, I want some sort of feedback loop. I want to be like, okay, I actually do this, and now it either tells me I'm wrong, or I need to fix it or whatnot, versus just a page in a book that says, like, here's some code, this is what it does.
And there's a lot of books that I haven't read them because it's me. But there's a lot of things that I hear feedback of, like, oh, here's all the specific use cases, and the questions that I tend to ask is, well, do they provide the actual structure as you're building these out, or are they telling you, okay, now put this piece in, now put this piece in? I think some of the very pivotal things about coding is getting the skeleton in there and understanding what different pieces you have in your code, like it just even as a note there that you can eventually remove, of just like, here's some just general I forgot what it's called, but the laying out what the structure is of what the script is going to do, and then you just start dumping your information in there as you need to write it. And some of the folks that I know that deal with, or that have total struggle, is they're looking at this big picture view of, oh, I need so much done out of whatever script I'm trying to build, without realizing, like, it's actually quite simple from just the perspective of, okay, it's just one step at a time. That's all coding is okay, getting to the next piece, getting to the next piece. I mean, I'm not a software developer, and I'm sure saying that probably just sent somebody over the edge, and now they just unsubscribed. But for me, it's always been like, let me dump everything in as more of a syntax thing, and just get that general structure, and now I'm going to start filling in the gaps. Like, what does this actually represent in Python? What does this actually represent in JavaScript, as some examples?
Yep. So yeah, good place to get started, and definitely Python specifically is something that I think anybody in this industry should start learning fairly early.
Cool. And then Linux Academy. Linux Academy has now changed over to a cloud guru. They got purchased, and they are. I had access to Linux Academy from a previous employer, and it was fantastic. I loved it. There was just so much stuff on there. The people were very excited as they were teaching. It was all just a do the stuff as you will. There didn't seem to be any like specific hard requirements of doing things at certain times or anything like that. So if there is if you do have the means to be able to provide that to your employees, certainly do that. From what we can tell, it was about $35, but that doesn't necessarily mean, or $35 per user per month, I think. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the cost is at the enterprise level. It might be something where you just get a handful of licenses and you just have to kind of pay for this large chunk of money, and then you can just kind of hand out those licenses or seats. But it's a super wonderful platform of a lot of folks who seemed pretty excited with the things that they got to build out and teach folks on.
So yeah, the one in here that's not necessarily like a service is the Humble Bundle stuff. The reason this is nice is every once in a while they will have sales of like security books, for example, that you can get for like pennies to dollars, and it would be like a handful of books. These bundles do expire, so it is one of those things you have to pay attention to see when they're having that sale. But when they do, it's usually very, very cheap and includes a lot of good books. So no reason not to pick it up, especially if you are somebody who does actually like reading through something. And a lot of these, like I know in the last one I picked up quite a few different books that I had a previous interest in. So do pay attention to that. Humble Bundle obviously does a number of different things that's not security focused. But when they do have these types of kind of security bundles, yeah, definitely check that out.
And then finally, some of the other things to do while in tandem of your normal learning is webcasts, right? John Strand, Black Hill stuff we talked about him last week. Professor Messer talked about him last week. I can't stress those enough. They are just wonderful resources, and for just watching John talk about just about anything, you want to get excited as well. Like the last webcast that he was talking about ransomware things, you wanted to be like yeah, and just get really, really excited as he was talking about all his stance on it, what he thinks about what companies need to worry about. I mean, the fact that for however long we've been talking about, we have to focus on security being worried about the budget and security being worried about all of this, and now it's become, no, this is a way of doing business. You want to do business, this is an expectation. It's no longer optional. So like there's a lot of things that he has been saying, has been trying to provide to the community as far as just that general outreach. And I get excited every single time I watch one of his things.
Yeah, and I mean that's usually a sign of a good instructor is they are excited about the subject. Like you could tell that they actually care, like they have a passion for it. And we mentioned Ryan earlier, and anybody who knows Ryan, like that he does this stuff because he truly enjoys it. Like he's super excited about it, and he wants you to be excited. And that's kind of how the best presenters and the best speakers and the best teachers tend to be.
Yep. So that is a lot of our suggestions, a lot of the things that we've provided to people over the past few years. Generally, the ideas here is or I guess the one thing we should say is that this isn't like a de facto list. These are just some pointers, places to go, and explanations about what they are. But however you get to your end goal, it's going to be different for everybody. But the one thing we will mention is try and, just going back to what we said in the last little piece here, was make sure you've got a mentor that's helping you, guide you along, so you don't fall into this trap where maybe not necessarily listening to the wrong words, but maybe you're listening to someone who has a completely different focal point. As an example, if you're sitting there listening to a CISO who has a CISO's perspective on things, and you are trying to get into a junior position, and suddenly like that, what you're trying to do within that junior position doesn't necessarily match up to what maybe this other CISO believes, it's back to things being a disservice, right? Like, sure, end goal, this CISO or top level person may have a very solid, strong idea as to what they're trying to get. But this junior just got something out of it, such as like trust in an AV, or making sure that we have these X amount of different pieces of security, and we need to believe that they're going to stop things. And people aren't going to want to hear that. They're going to want to hear the trust but verify stuff. They're going to want to hear a lot of these more very granular pieces about how do you actually trust and verify. So that's the one thing to really focus on here, is there's always going to be different ways to get to that end goal. But just remember, like it's good to have some guides, and multiple, if you can find multiple.
And like at the end of the day, a lot of that will come just through that networking experience, as well as by kind of exposing yourself to basically different points of view, different people in different industries and different levels of industry. You're gonna get a more, I think, of a holistic picture, so you're not hyper focused on just maybe one thing. So again, it all kind of feeds into itself. It's like the wider your circle of both mentors and people you're learning from, like the more of a picture you're gonna have for kind of like different parts of the industry, different stages of careers and stuff like that. And all of that has its own value, and all of that can inform your own development.
Yeah, it's almost as if like diversity of thought matters. I don't know who would have ever thought about that, but it's crazy.
Somebody clearly who was not smart at all.
Yeah. Okay, so some of the other things to talk about and to focus on as you're moving forward is some of the obvious. Learn virtual machines. If you haven't downloaded something like VirtualBox yet, or if you haven't downloaded VMware's VMware's VMware Player, or if you're on Mac, there's Parallels. There's a lot of these tools that allow for virtualization, but there's more to it than just building out that virtualization or spinning up a box. VirtualBox itself has a lot of really cool features to where you can build out an actual like pseudo network within it, and that's some great means of being able to get hands-on with network security. So if you haven't messed around with VirtualBox, the one thing that I will say is it does tend to have some issues with its guest editions and properly resizing things, or knowing how to it being always the actual guest editions itself always working, being able to like copy and paste into the VMs. So there's definitely some frustrations there every now and then, but it is a fantastic tool to learn on. And you can kind of build out your own like tapped network and all these other things, set like your network device in promiscuous mode, to be able to get a feel for like, what's it like to actually set up an environment where one system can start seeing all the traffic from all the other systems in that environment, and start building your own alerting on it if you want. So it's super cool, but those are great. However, with the push to cloud and where all these companies are moving towards, the things that I would really, really stress on as hey, it's going to be great to focus on this for the next 5 to 10 years is going to be Kubernetes. It's going to be Docker. It's going to be any kind of containerized environment. Terraform is a fantastic tool. Anything that is very focused on the continuous development, continuous implementation, because that's what a lot of things are built around. I mean, it's all about tearing down infrastructure and building it up automatically, or not having to worry about patching things and the patching not working because you have this CDCI deployment where you can just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to remove these boxes and turn these other boxes on automatically. I 100% think that that's the future of where security is going to go, not to mention the fact that we have to protect all of that and understand the foundations of a lot of that stuff. But it's a good thing to start with.
Yeah, definitely, and this also ties into, again, those places like Pluralsight, etc., and this is why it's good to have that kind of dearth of options, essentially, or variety of options, rather, to be able to say, well, I don't know that much about cloud stuff. Do they have a course on introduction to AWS, introduction to Google Cloud, introduction to Azure, etc.?
All the cloud infrastructure that's out there, they give you just a boatload of credit. And by boatload, I mean me and a couple other people built out a challenge, like an actual challenge for the company that we worked at. And when we built it, we built everything on Google Cloud, and they gave you like $300 and 3 months worth of service for free. And we were able to build up the whole entire challenge, get everything prepped and ready, and also do, I think we had it go for about 2 weeks. And all the traffic that was to the different pieces of infrastructure that we had, all this other stuff, we were still way under the $300. So it's a great means to start exploring in. And same thing with Amazon, $300. I think it was $300. Azure's at $200, but these are the mainstays, right? Amazon, Google Cloud, and Azure are the big three right now. Some of the other cloud infrastructures are things like Vultr. That's where we see a lot of attackers utilize, or DigitalOcean. The folks like to utilize infrastructure on there when they're doing their big time scanning. So when you're actually doing your research and you look up at an IP and it says like, oh, it's just this weird hosting platform, that tends to be what happens, right? They just have they spin up a VM at X company, they do their scan, they find all the things that are vulnerable, then they're just going to tear it down, pull back the results, and attack from a completely different country. Yep.
And the thing with that, all of this cloud stuff, like Jason was mentioning, this is kind of where things are going. So having to have that foundation, or at the very least a rudimentary understanding on how these things work, you're probably going to run into it no matter where you end up going.
And then we have CTFs. CTFs are going to be great environments for people to learn in, but again, the things we talked about before, find a mentor, find someone who will actually do them with you, not necessarily hand in hand, but someone that you can send questions to, talk with them about it, figure out ways around it. And you as the mentor, if you're the one listening and you're the mentor, make sure you're not telling the person the answer. That is still okay. I'm not going to be one of those people who say like, don't ever give someone the answer. However, if it's a situation where somebody is very new to the experience, to whatever variable is there, talk to them about each stage, explain each stage. Don't just say, oh, well, this thing is base 64. I ran this thing and decoded it. We're done. that's not helping them. That's just giving them this simple idea of I know this means this, and it doesn't help them in future interviews. I know this from experience from all the different people that I've talked to, where that's been not just what they've been told, but I'll admit my own mistakes. These are things that I've said before to people, of like, oh yeah, just jump into these CTFs, see if you can get through them, and X amount of years later, couple years later, like I talked to them and realized like, oh, I didn't actually give them good information. Some folks are of the opinion that that's kind of leading the horse to water, right? And it's up to them to drink. But I don't totally agree with that. I think there is there's plenty there that you as a teacher or as a mentor can still build into a lot of that learning. And a good portion of that is understanding how those people learn. And that's one thing that we are not good at, just as an industry, as people. We want to focus on, okay, in my brain, this is how I got to the answer, so everybody else should be able to get to it that way. And that doesn't work. I just flat out, that's not going to work ever. We need to be able to understand and adapt to every single situation if we want to be the future mentors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the part that's very important, is different people learn in different ways, so you have to kind of allow them the room to do that. Like, even to me, this is one of the things I tell people when it comes to what makes you a good analyst, and one of the things I focus on is, I don't care, like, I might give you, for example, like, okay, when you're doing a ticket, here's some things you have to hit on. But, that's A, B, and C. How you get from A to B and B to C, I almost don't care. I'll give you the room to say, okay, I'll find my own best way to do that and to learn and to fill in those blanks. And somebody else on your shift, one of your teammates, might get there completely differently, and that's okay, as long as you hit those major things and you get to the same big things I want you to hit on. How you actually get there, you find the thing that works for you. Because to me, one of the biggest things I see is an issue generally when it comes to a lot of these environments is people being told, here's a checklist, follow the steps.
Yeah.
Well, that only works in that situation because it takes the thinking out of it for you. But then the second that checklist breaks or doesn't work or doesn't fit a scenario, you are stuck. Where to me, if I give people some room to say, okay, I want you to hit on these things, how you get there, make it tailor your way of doing things, your way of learning, your way of absorbing information. And the other benefit of that is maybe they'll find a way that's more efficient, and then we can say, hey, maybe everybody else wants to know about this and it works better for them as well. But you can't foster that type of learning if you have very rigid ways you force people to kind of these boxes and make them fit into it.
It's all about the what could be. That's everything I believe in. I really hate the concept as to the what is and how it's always been type of mentalities. And mostly because things that we do and things that we discover and things that we create, as we've created them, they're expired. They're already stale. So if we are not putting ourselves in an ever-learning, ever-constantly changing type of environment, we're doomed to sink. And that's one of the frustrating things I tend to find in a lot of security environments that I talk to, is that people go like, oh yeah, I love our process and procedures, and the things that we're doing is good, and we're protected with how the things are right now. And when you start asking them like, well, what are you doing to change it? What are you doing to evolve? What are you doing to go to the next spot? It tends to be like, well, it's working good. Why are we doing that? And those are the situations where if you're not putting money into the research and development side of stuff, you're not doing well for your company. You're not looking out for the future of your company. You're just looking out for the now. And as security professionals, we should always be focusing on what's to come instead of what is. And yeah.
I mean, exactly. The bottom line is, if you're in this industry, and basically you think it's fine to just coast with the level of knowledge you have, and that'll always be relevant, like, you're in the wrong industry. Like, it's ever changing. You have to keep learning. You have to keep evolving, and that's true just for you as an analyst, but also for the companies as well. Like, in order to be able to respond. So yeah, absolutely. Like, you have to have that type of right mindset that says, like, no, maybe this worked even as recently as 6 months ago, but now there has been a massive shift because of some event that has now changed a lot of these paradigms. So you have to have that progressive mindset in that sense. To go back a little bit to the CTF stuff, there's a number of different CTFs, and I think a lot of people maybe think, like, as a CTF, it's like a very red team focused style thing. Hey, I have to hack a thing and find a thing, and it doesn't always have to be that. There's so many different formats for these, different skill levels. One of my favorite things is basically network forensics based CTFs. That's focusing on things like PCAP analysis, things like host forensics or network forensics, and those are not. And some people also, I know, they don't do well when they have a very strict kind of live timed event. That's a lot of pressure. So a lot of these you can do at your own pace. So don't dismiss a CTF because maybe you have a mental image of, like, what a CTF is this very kind of traditional old school style red team one. Like, there's so many and so much variety that there's something in there for you. You just have to kind of do the research, and there's a lot of stuff there. So don't kind of sleep on that because maybe you're worried, like, I have to be doing this during this specific time, and it's going to be this red team stuff that I'm not that interested in. There's different things that fit all kinds of skills and all kinds of people, so definitely.
Some of the reference to those, there's OpenSoc. OpenSoc puts things together at DEF CONs, and I think they did Cactus Con this year as well. And if you ever have a chance to work or to act within an OpenSoc challenge, do it. It gives you hands-on experience with so many things: Elasticsearch, Suricata, all these different very open source, very core, very very core tools that you yourself, you may never encounter again, but at the same time, you now have the syntax. You have the general understanding of, okay, in firewall logs, I'm looking for this. In IPS logs, I might be looking for this. If I'm trying to search and how I search, it may be different between going to Splunk, going to something like Microsoft ATP, trying to deal with the Cusco language. But the fact of the matter is you have a general concept now of what I'm trying to look for, why I'm trying to look for it. And then it just becomes a matter of, like, okay, how do I maneuver within this environment? That tends to be a big difference in a lot of brand new folks. Is they talk about what they've worked on, and their answer to, like, oh, can you think of ways of doing blah and something else? Their answer tends to be like, oh, well, I haven't used that tool before. It's like, okay, well, that's great. I want to know conceptually, like, what would you do?
Yeah, exactly. And that's another kind of drawback of focusing on the tool instead of the methodology, is you tend to conflate the two and confuse the fact that, well, this is just how you do things because that's how that works in that tool. So you're not necessarily focusing on the methodology and thinking about, how do I do this task? And if you focus on that, if you focus on the how, then at that point a different tool is merely just different syntax to learn, or a different procedure for implementing that methodology, but the methodology itself doesn't change. So that's, to me, more important to focus on, and it'll serve you a lot better in the long run to kind of take that type of mindset, I think.
Yep. We will try and dump some links to different CTFs in the description of whatever this article or this podcast will have. It will certainly be at least on our website for what this podcast is, but some of the other ones only have character limits, so it's hard to add a bunch of links in there. But we'll definitely add some of the things in there. The next piece is training, and training is definitely something that should be going hand in hand with whatever you're learning. And by that I mean, like, if you're looking at the Professor Messer videos or watching any of the John Strand's videos or going through any of the Pluralsight stuff, to take a look at things such as like DigitalOcean. They have a million different guides on DigitalOcean's community section. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be the best way to build something. It's not always going to be 100% secure. But if you've never done something such as like spin up an IRC server, if you've never done something such as create an actual mail gateway and figure out how that stuff works or understand how that stuff works, these aren't bad things to take a look at. Just like jumping on these different places that have guides. Even YouTube has got plenty of different folks who throw videos on there of, here, this is how I did this, and trying to recreate it. Now, it's not something that I would say you should go on there, try and stand up in production environments, but these are different ways to get that exposure to tools. I mean, just tossing together Elasticsearch as an example, or utilizing Docker to set up Elasticsearch. All these things, I would be pretty surprised if DigitalOcean doesn't have some form of, this is how I did this community tutorial on.
And the next part here is like the training. When we say training, we kind of do mean that hands-on training. A lot of the stuff we did before is a lot of videos and stuff like that. So this is more alongside that, like I said before, different people learn different ways. So generally the best way to do something, at least for me, is, okay, I'll watch something, but then I'll say, okay, I need to actually do that myself now, and kind of repeat that, because something might look very easy in a video, but then you go do it yourself and you're like, oh god, why did none of these things show up in the video as a problem? So yeah, that hands-on experience is definitely important. And like we said before, you might not always have a massive budget or access to $1 million hardware and all this other stuff that you only get access as part of your job. But what you can do, and as we mentioned, as Jason mentioned, is the VM side, is you can build a simple lab very easily with things like VMware, with things like VirtualBox. Get some distributions. We talked before about Tsurugi and Sift, Flare VM, and Remnux for the Windows side of things, for Flare anyway. And then Remnux for the reverse engineering, Security Onion for network forensic stuff, things like Circata, Zeek, Splunk, Elasticsearch, etc. All of these things are generally free. It costs you nothing except, find some box you can throw the stuff onto and start poking away at.
Kind of to add on that is, if you're actually utilizing things like AWS's free $300 stuff, start poking around things like Cloudflare or any of their tools for, I think AWS's or Cloudflare's AWS. Anyway,
Amazon owns everything.
Yeah, pretty much. Start poking around the different functionality and understanding what those log sources look like. I mean, quite frankly, most of the stuff nowadays is going to be dumped out in a JSON format, and because it's going to be dumped out in a JSON format, it is incredibly easily digestible or ingestible, one or the other, into log aggregators. I mean, in nearly all cases, like with Elasticsearch, I know you don't even really have to say anything or build any kind of parser. You just go, here you go, this stuff's JSON, and Elasticsearch is like, cool, here you go, here's everything in an easy indexed format. So if there's anything like that you can start messing around with, getting your hands on and just taking a look at and seeing what that output looks like, do it. And on top of that, When you start, for example, Flare VM. If you have Flare VM, you have those Windows machines, go download some of the things out there like APT Simulator. Just run it. See what happens when it does things like creates that Cobalt Strike beacon. And if you're recording that data within VirtualBox and see what that output looks like, you'll start getting hands-on experience with those log sources and how these things look like on a network or how these things look like on a host. So the information is there. The data exists. The data is there. The biggest struggle is always going to be having structured guidance. Back to the mentorship. So when someone has failed at this and you as a mentor say like, oh, it's just that person, I highly suggest for you to take a look at the mirror, into the mirror, and just say like, is it the person? Maybe this is something with me. Maybe this is with the way that I'm providing instruction. Maybe I just don't have time. That's okay to admit to yourself that you don't have time instead of X person is dumb. So that's I'm just going to write it off because I only met them on LinkedIn once and I don't care. I haven't really ran into anybody that's like that. But the fact of the matter is like, it does mean that those people aren't out there, and we want to be pushing people towards this field and towards this industry because we know how important it's going to be for the next however many years computers exist.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, nobody has gotten to where they've gotten in their career alone, and all of us probably have at least a handful of people that we can say, you know, we're our mentors and we're that positive influence. And when you understand how, like, personally, when I know how where I am because of those types of people, it makes me understand how important it is for somebody new to have somebody like that and how difficult it can be when you don't.
The last piece we have for the training, something we already talked about before, watch videos. There's a mess of different videos on YouTube, people testing things. People will just put GIFs. I mean, it doesn't have to be a full video. People put GIFs on Twitter all the time of them running exploitations. Oh man, something I was actually going to bring up for the news section was that ghost process executable exploit. Did you see a little bit about that? Like I think the Elastic.
Yeah, I did actually. I did read that. That was granted, a lot of that stuff was like, I'm not sure I 100% understand it, but I definitely understood like the techniques and the methodology behind it, and it was at the very least it was a very, very interesting read.
Yeah. So for folks here, take a look at ghost processes and specifically what Elastic did to kind of build that out, and Microsoft's response to it, which is pretty classic Microsoft, was we don't consider this a critical threat, and this is more of you finding loopholes around. I mean, this is me paraphrasing for them, but this is more of a problem of someone finding loopholes in the way that it could be used and exploited. Has to have this long chain of events before it actually becomes a problem. So it's probably something that eventually will get patched and fixed, but it is a means of being able to hide yourself from things like Defender or just AVs in general and not get caught.
It was definitely interesting, and I mean, for those of you who kind of want to know more about things like defense evasion techniques, I think that's a really, conceptually, I think it's a really, really interesting one. So yeah, definitely we should probably include a link to that as well, so people can go check it out if they hadn't.
Yeah. So we're at the point where we're getting close to wrapping up. The last few different pieces here is our shout outs to the community. One of the ones that is always wonderful to have on your Twitter feed is Positively Blue. They're a webcast. They tend to do things every single week. I know folks like Ryan have been on it a couple times. Some of the people who created it were BSD Bandit. I think it's at BSD Bandit on Twitter. And then the other feller I had his name right here, Shawn Thomas. So he is at understudy 77. And I can't say enough positive things about Positively Blue. The BSD Bandit, he posts videos, it feels like every single day. I don't know if there's ever been any missed, but he's always got a new shirt on, which is the dumbest thing I think I've ever said, is like, yeah, this guy's got shirts. But he's always got a new like retro gaming shirt every single time he posts. And he's extremely positive, always trying to get folks in and making them have a better day. I mean, he just gets on there and says things like, "Hey, you can do it. Thanks for following." All these other positive notes about being in the security field and all these great things. One of the last things they talked about was just security operations, and how security operations needs to stop being looked at as this thing that is the bare bottom of all of security. Security operations needs to be seen more of at the same level of across the board security engineering, just general incident response folks, reversing. These are all a situation where there's been a belief that, hey, you have X amount of experience, so you have to move up. Well, we're starting to see a lot of SOCs have people who have a lot of experience, but the operations side is where they're happy, where they're sticking in. And that experience to just say like, oh, you're part of an operations team, and trying to suggest that they are lesser in some way, shape, or form is just wrong. And we're providing that wrong perspective to even the juniors, who then learn that and then start doing it themselves because they think that that's what it means to get better in security, is to move up into, or I say move up, but now I should be saying move over into maybe an engineering focused role. And I feel like we at both our previous jobs, we felt that way in some cases, right? Like we felt like we were empowered in some situations. There was always a little bit of that, like, hey, I'm on X team, and so I have more experience, but that I wouldn't say that was held over us. That was our own perception.
That's, something like that I think is a very important point, to just say like, certain people find their niche and they're happy there, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think maybe it's not even just our industry, but I think there's that mindset of like, you always have to be looking up. But like at a certain point, I know even for myself, like if that was the case, I would have been looking to get into management a lot sooner, but that's just not something I personally enjoy. I like the technical side. I like the forensic side. I like tinkering with things. I like dealing with malware and, having to learn and things like that, versus having to set people's performance goals and deal with, BS drama because somebody said something mean to someone else. Like, it's there's nothing wrong with people, obviously, who enjoy that part of it as well. But my point being is like, it's perfectly fine to find the things you're happy with and excel in that. Like, you shouldn't necessarily constantly feel like you're having to do something else just to feel like, oh, I have to keep moving. Where I'll say the caveat to that is, if you're not learning, at that point, maybe that's a change of roles is needed, or maybe a change of environments. Sure. But as long as you're able to learn, and as long as you're enjoying the things you're doing, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with just excelling and being a senior in a team with a lot of people that aren't. Like, that's a perfect opportunity for you to say like, well, now part of my job can be, I can become a mentor for these people, because there's always new people coming in, and you can use that as an opportunity to be like, I have the experience, they don't, and I can use that in a positive way to help them get to where I am.
And maybe that's a management problem, right? Like if somebody ends up saying or uttering the words in their security operations role, like, I'm not learning anything else, maybe that is, hey, this person is being underutilized. What can we do to better our security environment within the operations team, and utilize this person's knowledge? You don't necessarily have to say skills, like they don't even have to know engineering skills, but getting them into situations where they're utilizing that knowledge and providing their perspectives, maybe that's all they need. Maybe that's what they want. And that in turn will help them learn and help them keep pushing forward. Because as we said before, this is ever-changing, always evolving, an always evolving field. So yeah, if anybody is ever at the point where they're just not learning something or not seeing something new, better look out.
Yep, exactly.
So last few pieces here. Tool recommendations. This is the hunting Elasticsearch instance and the Mordor logs. So there is a person on GitHub, and I just want to make sure that I get all the people in here. Yeah, so the Mordor project. It is mortordatasets.com, and it has tons of different data sets of actual APT instances that have been cleaned. They've been built in a way that they can just be ingested right into this hunting Elasticsearch instance. It's by Roberto Rodriguez and Jose Luis Rodriguez, which is at Cyber War Dog, with Leet Speak, I should say, in there, and then Cyber Panda H, with more Leet Speak in there. But these the folks that created these data sets are great. I've gone through them a handful of times. I recommend them to just nearly everybody, because it has things like it has a full data set of seeing initial infection vector to exploitation to CNC. And when you're talking about a situation where somebody's like, oh, I just don't have exposure to an actual attack or what it looks like, that this is an actual attack and what it looks like. So you're talking about the utilization of PowerShell and things being encoded and Mimikatz being utilized. You're talking about, I think one of them is an actual VBS download that starts the whole thing. You can, if I remember correctly, I think it was tied to maybe a phishing email. It's probably been about a year since I have really dug into it. But from the perspective of ingesting it, you can utilize this other tool that they've built around Elasticsearch. And again, it's called Help. Sorry for the typing, but I need to take a gander real quick at some of the information on there. It's just on Cyber War Dog's GitHub page. And it has a picture of an elk as Robin Hood. But it's got all this data that you can ingest into this thing. If you just want to get some hands-on with Elasticsearch, download this sucker as soon as possible. Just looks like it's still actively being worked on. Some updates as of a few months ago. So it's certainly something to take a look at.
Yep, and this is something you can also tie into some of the stuff you mentioned earlier, things like your security onion VM, and kind of tie that into, like, how do I actually search, what to look for, what do some of these things look like from an IDS, IPS perspective, etc. So it gives you some of the data to kind of make some of those tools, basically to kind of see what they would look like in a real world environment. And yeah, just another small piece, essentially, of a way to make your learning even more effective.
Wonderful. Well, Alan, that's what we had for today. We we got to, looks like this it's still going to be a little bit longer, but we hopefully have saved some time for folks, and we'll be whittling away at this over the course of the next couple months. Probably take us like 2 more before we are really focused and hitting all the buttons we want without any of the kind of like ramblings that I like to ramble.
Well, it's hey, we're not overproduced. We're real. We're raw.
Sure. Yeah, we're raw.
Not the wrestling show.
Yeah. Oh, wrestling. So there's a whole bunch of people who got let go today. It kind of looks like they are.
Jason, stop it.
Oh.
This is not a wrestling podcast.
I told you. Well, I will have at least one thing about wrestling every single one of these, and I plan to make it happen. So a bunch of people on 205 Live just got released today, and that's very unfortunate. So the last things that we have here is our social media and listener support links. So as usual, twitter.com/malwarewolf, youtube.com/malwarewolf, and malwarewolf.com for just all of our blog posts. Malwarewolf.com is probably our best place to go because things aren't going to be condensed. You're not going to have to worry about things just saying like, oh, hey, go back to this other page in order to see all the links and all that crap. But as for the podcast itself, definitely check out anchor.fm/malwarewolf. These are our mainstays. The youtube.com/malwarewolf is going to be where our bite-sized series is going to be hosted. Hopefully that is people find some use in that, or they're just going to start flaming me on Twitter and just being like, what the, I can't even follow anything you're doing, you're crazy. But that's fine. I am a little crazy, whatever.
I mean, it'll happen no matter what, so I'm just expecting it.
Sure, yeah. Just embrace the failure. That's kind of how my life has been.
Failure is how you learn.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we really appreciate it. If you go to some of those pages and you like what we do, please follow, like we said, follow us and subscribe, etc. Every little bit helps when we're starting out. If you do want to support us in some other way, we do have listener support on the Anchor page as well. So yeah, if any of this stuff resonates with you, any sort of support is welcome, even if it's just tuning in and listening, recommending us to some other folks. Because at the end of the day, all we want to do is expand our community and kind of foster an environment where we can all learn and grow as professionals, and every little bit helps. So thank you very much for those who have been listening this far, and I guess we can call it a wrap for the week, and we'll talk to you guys in a few weeks.